Welcome to the Unknown Broadcast webcast. And as always, I confess that I am so conservative, I have trouble turning left even when I'm driving. This is broadcast number 11, and our guest tonight is a friend, actually a new friend that I met in October in Salt Lake City, Utah, Carl Teichrib, and we're talking about what is transhumanism and why should we care. I'm Don Vino, president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown webcast. And our senior researcher, Ron Hensel, who is at the moment, had been captured, I think, by transhumanists and carried away. He will be joining us when he is able. He's having technical difficulties. And so, Carl, I'd like you to give a brief introduction of yourself. Who are you? What is it that you do, and why should we care about transhumanism?
Well, thanks, Don, for letting me be a part of your broadcast today. Who I am? I'm a Canadian-based Christian researcher. I've been doing or engaging in Christian research on worldview issues since the mid-1990s, a little bit even before that, back into 1993 or so. And in 1997, Gary Kaw, who's a Christian author, brought me down to Indiana, where I was his director of research until 2001. And since then, I've been operating more on a freelance basis. For a number of years, we had a magazine called Forcing Change. We are in the process of restructuring all of that. But the bottom line, Don, is my job, my task is to try to understand the trends of the time, the secular, the pagan trends, be they in politics, international politics, and I've gone to different United Nations events, or be they interfaith gatherings, and that's obviously where you and we met at the Parliament of World Religions last fall. And I take a look at a whole number of different subcategories of the movement of man declaring himself to be as God. And transhumanism fits in that beautifully, because it is the concept of us ascending, becoming more than human, using technology to manipulate, to advance evolution, and to somehow ascend and to become more than human beings. That's the premise of it. We're going to defeat death. We are going to defeat aging. We are going to enhance ourselves or upload ourselves. And why we should be concerned on is this, especially as Christians. I'm not so concerned about the gadgetry or the technology. It's interesting, absolutely. But the worldview behind it really goes back to Genesis chapter 3 and the concept here of being as God. We're doing it now through our hands, through the technology, through the science, through the works of our hands. And so how does this then, how do we now counter this as a Christian? How do we approach this topic? And I believe that the worldview behind it is the worldview that it's a dangerous worldview. It's a worldview that is steeped in hubris and the pride of man. It really is a technological Tower of Babel that we're building. That's really where it fits. That's the theme of it.
I like that technological Tower of Babel. And this is important because in the last few days, of course, when we met in October, I had never heard of transhumanism. And I thought, it's just another interesting thing I will eventually have to look into. After we kind of scheduled you being on here, I had a few people were emailing me links to articles and videos, and they are very concerned because it is starting to infiltrate Christian organizations are coming out to promote it as a good thing. In fact, Charisma Magazine, I don't know if you saw this yesterday, had an article with a little video clip of someone arguing that Jesus prophesied transhumanism in Matthew. And we have WND, World Net Daily, which I don't know if there's a heresy they haven't met that they can make profitable, but Joseph Farah and Joe Kovacs also seem to be involved in promoting this transhumanism idea as well. When we say transhumanism, what does that mean to the average person tuning in for the first time?
It means a movie. It means Avatar. It means the X-Men. It means something that they see on the big screen. Uh, it really fits with the mem that's come out of Hollywood over the last number of years. People think of Star Trek. People think of the science fiction of Arthur C. Clarke. The image that they have is a Hollywood-based image, but Hollywood has been preaching this for a very long time. And I have to tell young people, especially young people, whenever you're watching a movie, consider what it is that they are preaching to you, because they're sending a message. And so the movie Avatar is probably one of the best examples of a transhumanist movie, a movie that isn't just simply a secularist version of transhumanism, but carries on a spiritual element, getting in touch with the earth, connecting yourself into the life cycle of the planet, the cosmic consciousness. And you're doing all this through a technology-based world. And so when most people look at the concept of transhumanism, they think automatically what they've seen in the movies. Johnny Depp with the movie Transcendence, which came out only at, what, I think 2 years ago, absolutely promoted transhumanism. And so that's what people think of right away. And what's interesting is they're basing some of the ideas that's being presented in the films on already existing technologies and the theories of how those technologies can be used to enhance humanity to become more than human.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because when you and I were talking on Sunday, I brought up Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek. I watched Star Trek almost from the beginning. And he really based a lot of his ideas on existing scientific thought and theories that he then put into film and carried on his show. Are we moving in that direction as humans to sort of become Data, let's say, the character in Second Generation?
I think what we are seeing is not that we're going to become cyborgs like Data, but that we're kind of Data already, in the sense that everything's numbered, everything is connected. We're living in this incredibly interconnected world. Of that, there's no question at all. And so you're just simply a cog in that machine, or a bit, a unit in that interconnected global wireless system. And it's interesting because the idea of transhumanism is something that isn't just new. It's been around for quite some time. Teilhard de Chardin, the Catholic Jesuit mystic, talked about the new sphere and how we have this cosmic consciousness that's developing. And eventually man will, through science and technology, evolve and become connected into this consciousness, this global consciousness system. And he called it becoming the ultra-human. We're going to expand our borders and our boundaries and become a part of this global society, this global civilization. Now, Chardin, of course, in the New Age movement, is a hero because of his views that we would become one with the cosmic Christ, and we'd be using science and technology to do that. Well, that's already an early idea of the transhumanist worldview. And so it's been around for some time. But now we have the technology in play that is allowing these people who have all of a sudden, you could call it an excitement about the movement, to be able to say, wow, maybe we can upload our consciousness using virtual reality, brain-computer interfacing. Maybe we can upload ourselves. Maybe we can link ourselves in. Maybe we can become like the Borg. Maybe we can become an avatar, or whatever the technology may be. I mean, it's a dream, but it's a dream built around an ideology and a spiritual worldview. And that's the important part.
Right. Well, and if we become like the Borg, I love the Borg. I just think that speaks to so many political issues, almost even. Who becomes the Queen Mother? Google?
I'm glad you mentioned Google. I'm holding in my hand Ray Kurzweil's book from a few years ago, the age of spiritual machines. I mean, Ray Kurzweil, director of engineering at Google, is like I said before the show even began, as we had some of our little conversations here, he's a rock star within the transhumanist movement. When I was at the Global Future 2045 Congress, a transhumanist event that took place in New York a couple of years ago, he was one of the keynote speakers. And I mean, my goodness, it was like he was the man leading the way. He's the one moving forward with the technology, the dreams, the aspirations, and he could motivate. At that point, the event was about 800 people. He could motivate 800 people from MIT, from Oxford, from Yale, from Caltech, people from major tech industries towards this idea of let's move forward and enhance humanity through this transhumanist ideal.
So we have even billionaires who are involved in this, if I read your articles correctly.
Right, we do. In fact,
now, for them, is this an aspiration? Pardon?
Oh, go ahead.
Is this for them part of their aspiration to create immortality for themselves apart from God?
Yes. Because you're looking at it from a non-Christian viewpoint. There has to be some way to save yourself. You are a biological being that will have you have an expiry date, and the hope is that through our technology and science we can break through that expiration date and become either immortal or have an extended longevity. A good example was James Martin. In terms of billionaires, James Martin was one of the most influential individuals behind the computer industry in the 1980s. And he gave Oxford University its largest gift, its largest donation in the entire history of Oxford. I talked to James Martin in 2013 at the Global Futures 2045 Congress. He was already at that point getting up there in years. We had a great conversation, and he truly believed that, and he was hoping that this would come about. And he knew it wouldn't happen in his lifetime, but he was aspiring toward that, hopefully for the betterment of society down the road. Now, what's sad is 8 days later, he passed away. And so his technology never caught up to him, and so there are literally souls at stake in that people are putting their faith and trust in what science and technology can do for that aspect of salvation.
What is some terms that you use that we're unfamiliar with, like cosmism? What is cosmism?
Cosmism is a Russian-based spiritual ideology that came about at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, and it was built around the worldview of a man by the name of Nikolai Fedorov. And Fedorov believed that if Jesus could resurrect, he would be a model for all of our resurrections, and we could resurrect ourselves with science, with technology. He had an interesting worldview in that he connected theosophy, he connected Russian orthodoxy, and he connected concepts of Darwinian evolution and technology to create this mashup hope that eventually mankind could resurrect himself. And his view was important. I mean, Tsiolkovsky, another well-known Russian cosmonaut or cosmist, put papers together to help launch Russia's space program. These are people who had at least some measure of intellectual influence, not so much Fedorov, but his disciples afterwards. Today, cosmism is becoming a kind of a faddish new outlook of life, which was interesting because at the Global Futures 2045 event, cosmism played a huge role at that particular conference.
Okay. I wanted to ask you something else, and I'm like in my 60s, so every once in a while I have these brain burps. But you wrote in your article in the 2045 convention, quote, Hindu yoga master Mahayogi Pilot Baba, a former wing commander of the Royal Indian Air Force, told us something similar. Quote, You are the light, you are the truth, you are the beginning, you are the end, end quote.
That's original,
How is it that
hey?
Hinduism, pardon?
That's original, isn't it?
Yeah, I have heard that before, yeah.
Right.
How is it that Hindus and other religions seem to be tying into this as well, especially Hindus? I mean, in Hinduism, all is Maya, all is illusion. There is no reality. There is no you or me. There is
Right.
only me.
Right, right. Well, it was interesting because of that event. At the very closing of it, we had an interfaith panel where we had Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu speakers coming to talk about what religion will look like in a transhumanist future. And the bottom line was this: we would become as gods through our science and technology. We would ascend. We would become godlike in our capabilities. We would create literally a civilization of gods, which is why I find it kind of interesting the
I've heard
Mormon
that
side
before.
of it. Right. Yes, you definitely have heard that before. I mean, the religious side of it, Don, for me is kind of where I found where I kind of connected with it for the first time, and that was through the Mormon Transhumanist Association and their conferences. And I traveled in 2010 down to Salt Lake City to spend some time with the Mormon Transhumanist group. Went to one of their conferences, and then in 2013 was invited to speak at the event as a Christian critic of religious transhumanism. And I found it interesting how the Mormon community, at least a smaller segment of it, had an interest in transhumanism as a way of seeing their theology come to fruition through technology. To them, it made sense.
Okay.
Hi, Carl. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can, Ron.
I'm sorry I missed. I'm sorry I got in late. What did I miss? Well, actually,
well, we were talking about you mostly, but now that you're here, we'll do something else.
Alrighty. I couldn't help but overhear Mormon and transhumanism used in the same sentence. Does the Mormon? I must have missed a lot. Is the Mormon Church in the official hierarchy? What do they think of transhumanism?
Now, the Mormon Transhumanist Association doesn't have endorsement from the Mormon hierarchy, from the president or from any of the hierarchy. It's a standalone organization, but there is definitely some interest within some of the intellectuals within the Mormon community. And every year, when the Mormon Transhumanist Association holds their annual convention, and they just held it a couple of weeks ago, there's always that aspect of Mormon academics brought in to talk about, here we have science, here we have technology, here we have the ability now to use this in a way to demonstrate that we can become as gods. We can fulfill Joseph Smith's King Folliot discourse and become as God, because God, of course, was once just me or you. He was just once a man like any other man. And so how did God become God? Well, he must have had an advanced technology, a higher technology, a higher science. And so the quest here within the Mormon Transhumanist Association is to find that higher science. What's interesting is the Mormon Transhumanist Association is now the largest transhumanist study group, lobby group, academic think tank within the transhumanist community.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, I apologize for getting here late. I had numerous technical problems, which does not portend well for the future of our race if we are going to be merging with. If we're going to be merging with this technology, I think we
were just wondering, as you were going through all of that, if you're gonna be a Windows version of a transhuman or a Mac version of transhumanism.
You know, it's like you can think of all of the possible situations that you might be in life one day as a transhuman, and where you might need a reboot. Let's say you're out with, you're trying to get romantic with your wife one night. Oh, sorry, honey, I need a reboot. I'll be with you in about 20 minutes. Or you're a pastor preaching a sermon, and you're right in the middle, and all of a sudden, you need
a software update.
You need, I'm sorry. I was just, the reason I slowed down was because I was getting an update. We need to really think about this before we declare it the next step in human evolution. I mean, I've been working with computers since the Commodore, you know, and I still don't think we're ready. I have to apologize to our sponsors. I usually like to introduce them when we begin the show, and this because of my tardiness, which was again due to technical difficulties. I was not able to introduce them, but I can bring our first commercial to our viewing public today, because, you know, a lot of Christians are church hunting nowadays. I've noticed this. There are a lot of wandering evangelicals out there looking for a new place to fellowship, and so, you know, we have a question for you, and that is, are you getting a little, or I'm sorry, our church is getting a little too individualistic for your tastes? Do you often wish it wasn't so hard to fit in with new Christians you meet? Would you rather be part of a collective than a uniquely gifted member of a fellowship? Well, then Assimilation Ministries is for you, where Assimilation Ministries, where implanted in the body is not just a slogan. Our fine pastoral staff at Assimilation Ministries is waiting to help you be the best transhuman you can be. That would be Assimilation Ministries. Try them out this Sunday. You just might like them. Okay, so.
Are you with us, Carl? Is that okay?
Oh, that is awesome. That is really good. Where do I get ordination?
Yeah, we
You're
pride
not
ourselves.
ordained, you are assimilated.
Yeah, we pride ourselves in finding sponsors that really take an interest in the programming here, and
that you will never find anywhere else.
right.
Many of them are from the world's end theology outlet. So,
Yeah, this is a unique ministry, Assimilation Ministries. You know, you try to give people a helping hand when they're starting new ministries. You know, they take a new idea and they run with it. And obviously, these transhumanists are running with this. They're having conferences. They're getting together. It's well, okay. Tell us more. I obviously missed a lot.
I'm glad you brought up the whole church aspect, because what's interesting is there are now churches dedicated to the concepts of transhumanism. There's one right now in Florida called the Church of Perpetual Life. And the Church of Perpetual Life wants to end deathism, and that's their whole goal, to defeat death. And so they have services, they have worship. It's a church.
should we send them our commercial?
Yeah, we could. Didn't Christian Science already try this? You know, to end death. I mean, well, they just tried to declare death dead. You know, and so therefore we don't have it. So they're looking forward to making death extinct, is what you're telling us, right?
Correct.
Ah.
Good luck.
Well, just human death, I hope, because if like plants can't die, then what good is it trying to digest them when you eat them? So, all right. So, where does this take us? We have
Well, what are the political aspirations? We want to talk about the church. We'll come back to that. What are the political aspirations and the UN? How does that figure into this, if at all?
Well, it does, Don. One of the reasons why Global Future 2045 was held in New York City was because the transhumanist community put forward a letter to the United Nations Secretary General asking that this become a mandate or a major platform for the United Nations, that there needs to be some form of global structure to ensure that there is continuity globally regarding the movement towards transhumanism. What's interesting with transhumanism is there's really a number of different sides to it. You have an academic side, a theoretical side, and then you have the technology, which the companies making these technologies are not necessarily doing it always from the perspective of let's enhance humanity and become as gods, but rather they're just developing product that consumers want. And those products are fitting within the ideology or the theoretical side. But the political side is, yeah, the political side is very interesting, because if the theoretical ideological side continues to gain momentum, and it is, then there will be this cry for some organizing force or organizing entity to ensure that we do this properly for the betterment of our social evolution. You know, a few years ago, I kind of, well, a number of years ago, I kind of looked at the whole concept of transhumanism from that political point of view, and looked to see, okay, where does it stem from? And it goes back into that progressive era of the 1930s, the idea of technocracy, that engineers would be able to order a civilization, order society for the most efficient running of that society, that we need to put our faith and trust in those who can properly move us forward and create a progressive, engineered, efficient world. No, thank you. I'm not really too interested in that. It really takes away the human element. But ironically, that's kind of what transhumanism does anyways. And some transhumanists would argue with me, and I have friends who are transhumanists who say, well, we're not trying to take away the human element, we're enhancing the human element to become fully what we were always meant to be, and that is to become as God.
Now, you know, in most like literature and in film and in television, this idea is usually associated with various nightmare scenarios. You know, in other words, going back to the German science fiction film Metropolis back in the 1930s, all black and white, and the idea, you know, you go back, well, maybe a little more than 100 years even, where the idea that the machine is going to overtake the human, and that it's going to dehumanize us in one way or another, and it's never been thought of as a good thing. It's never been thought of as, it's always been viewed in terms of you know, not just the potential downfall, but, you know, the idea that we are going to lose our humanity through something like this one day. We'll stop being what we are and become something else that is probably not a good thing to be. These are all dystopian films. You know, I remember as a child or teenager maybe, there was a movie called Colossus: The Forbin Project. Does anybody remember that made-for-TV movie?
Sure.
It was the idea that if we had a supercomputer that could control our nuclear arsenal, it would make nuclear war less likely. Well, when we activated ours discovered quickly that the Russians had one too, just like ours, and the two teamed up and basically conquered the human race by saying, well, if you don't do what we say, we're just going to send all the missiles that you've plugged us into. We're going to destroy the planet. And I remember one of the declarations that the Colossus computer made as it declared victory over the human race was, freedom is an illusion. You need to do what I say in order to make sure that the human race continues. So that was dystopian. I believe for those who survived the Kubrick-Spielberg film AI, I've met some of these survivors. You know, they hated it, and it was a terrible experience for them, but they're in recovery now. You know, that was yet another dystopia. So why is it that, you know, you have the vast consensus of people seems to be that, you know, I don't know if we should go there, and these people are saying, yeah, let's not just go there. Let's make it happen as quickly as possible. What accounts for this kind of hyper zeal for this?
optimism that is the only way out. It's a rejection of the biblical worldview. So when you reject the biblical worldview, you need to find an alternative. You need to find an alternative salvation story. And that's how they view this, as that alternative. What's interesting is I'm glad you brought up the aspect of dystopian movies. For the longest time, transhumanism has kind of been associated with a secular, atheistic bent. Almost more of a B.F. Skinner's behavioralism attached to technology. Now we're seeing it more like a Maslow human potential, new spirituality, and the two of those coming together. One on the modernity side, the technology side, one on the post-modernity side, the concept of finding ourselves, and we're the ones who will be in control. We're the ones who are going to look for a new purpose or a new meaning or a new truth. And so you're seeing that coming together.
Tell people about Abraham Maslow so they understand the reference that you just made.
Oh, sure. Abraham Maslow was the psychologist who came up with the idea of felt needs and the hierarchy of needs. It really was about self-actualization. What's interesting with Maslow is so much of his influence wasn't just through psychology, but his involvement with the Esalen Institute out of California, which is, in a sense, the birthplace of American New Age thought. And the concept here being that we can actualize ourselves, we can move ourselves into a higher plane of ourselves. And so what you're seeing within the new spirituality that we have today, nobody likes to call it New Age, but it really is just the New Age. It's this sense of the self being actualized. It is no longer about religion per se, but about that spiritual feeling or that spiritual connection. And so science and technology now forms a part of that. Not too long ago, I was taking a look at a new application for virtual reality called Sound Self. Sound Self was developed by a young man who had an LSD experience at the Burning Man Festival, which has there's a really interesting side topic with transformational festivals like Burning Man. And he came up with the idea of creating an application for virtual reality, for a headset, where you speak a tone into the software, and using your Oculus Rift headset, you will experience this repetition of your own sound as it morphs and moves and gives you cosmic images and allows you to go into a meditative type state or a spiritual state that is driven by the technology.
So there are some people who are in this for the experiential side, is what you're saying, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There's a book, I remember I was really into science fiction as a kid, and after Michael Crichton came out with Andromeda Strain, he wrote a book called The Terminal Man. And I think there was, in that book, there's stuff about implants in the brain. There was a chapter devoted to people who become, well, he predicted that they would be electronic addicts. There would be implants or ways of hooking people's brains up to machines that would give them these intense euphoric experiences that go way beyond anything humans had ever experienced before. And that was back in the early 70s. So these people are going in the direction of they just want another high. They just want another thrill. But then there's like that's the pull aspect of it. That is what is drawing some people into this. But I also sense that there's a push, and the push that I'm detecting is the fear of death. Just this, even for people who believe that death is the cessation of existence, that it's the end of everything, there's this intense fear of that. Mm-hmm. Would you comment on that? Do you see that much? I mean,
absolutely.
Do you think? am I stating the obvious here, or what? You know, it's like.
You're stating the obvious, but it's an important obvious. One of the reasons why Ray Kurzweil from Google has been on his bandwagon of transhumanism is because his father passed away, and he'd like to find a way of resurrecting his father before Ray himself passes away. I had a chance to spend a little bit of time with one transhumanist talking about the idea of what death looks like, and the suggestion that was given to me was, well, you know, and this was a lady by the name of Natasha Vita-Moore, who's an aesthetic transhumanist. She's looking at the aesthetic side of it, and she was describing what death would look like. If we could defeat death, maybe we can choose death, so we can go on things like death vacations, or we can experience partial death living. I'm like, it was a really interesting conversation. That's, you know, how do you sit through something like that with a straight face? But you do.
Well, yeah. What you just take a temporary leave from death, or, you know, I don't understand this. I'm sorry. How do you get your head around that? If you take a vacation from death, I mean, there was a movie, Death Takes a Holiday, you might have remembered. And what was that?
Than that. Death vacation. So you die to go somewhere else, and then you come back. Is that the idea?
Yes. You can just unplug yourself.
Oh, so the vacation, death is the vacation.
Death is the vacation. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, that's. Maybe I'll pass on that one. I think I'll do Disney instead. You know,
it would kind of be like being an over-road truck driver. You just disconnect from everything else.
Yeah. Oh, is that? So, you know, but here we have, you know, what's interesting to me is that the author of Hebrews says that Jesus came to deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery, in Hebrews 2:15. And so you see this, this appears to me to be another form of slavery. They are so afraid, they will not turn to God, they will not turn to the Creator, the Maker, the Redeemer, the Savior. They will save themselves again. Once again, they'll come up with a self-salvation, you know, concept, but it's motivated by the same fear of death that keeps, you know, the human race as a whole in slavery, in bondage.
Yeah, you know, Carl, I want to approach something because we want to talk about how this affects the faith. And as we're talking, and I'm thinking about some of the things that you've written. Carl, by the way, for the viewers, has a number of articles he's written. We have them in PDF form. If you email me directly at donvino@midwestoutreach.org, I can send them as attachments. That would be fine. Carl gave us permission for that. Also, before we leave, he also is on Facebook. You can friend his Facebook page and kind of keep up on some of these things. But as I think about this, now I forget where I was going. You were talking about death takes a vacation. Oh, the church. One of the things that always concerns me is when we hear about these kinds of advances, we have two things that happen. One is some Christians, like we saw in Charisma magazine, go for it and try to say that somehow Jesus prophesied this would happen. Then we have, on the other hand, Christians who will not take advantage of certain medical, for example, advances because you may have a nanorobot put in you for the purpose of, I don't know, doing a diagnosis or fighting cancer or something like that. Is there a middle way in between those, or should we avoid technology being put into our body at all, or, you know, how do we respond to it as believers?
Oh, there's definitely a middle ground. I mean, Don, you're wearing eyeglasses right now. You're enhanced, right?
No, well,
I always like to think of Don as enhanced.
That's a scary thought. What would I be like without enhancements?
I mean, technology is a wonderful thing. Technology is something that can be used for incredibly beneficial means and for incredibly beneficial ends. We're using technology right now, and we're using technology that none of us could have foreseen 10 or 15 years ago. This is something that's gone leaps and bounds, and we're using it, we're employing it, we're not afraid of it, and I don't see any reason to be afraid of the technologies that are coming out. Certainly to understand, however, how the worldview around those technologies may play into the clash we see between biblical Christianity and what the world is doing. To me, that's far more important.
Can you name some, like, for instance, are we saying anything today that would prevent someone from getting let's say, a chip implanted in their brain to control epileptic seizures? Is that a bad thing? Would you say we need to be cautious about that? That could be leading us in the path of this transhuman movement, or would you say no? This is a good application. This is beneficial.
I would say there's beneficial sides to something like that because it is looking at overcoming a medical problem. You're not doing it with the hope or the idea that you're somehow going to supersede death or that this is going to be an act of salvation. We have all kinds of medical devices that we use already on a daily basis that are so important for all kinds of people to keep them alive or to give them a better standard of living in that respect. But when we take it to the extent that what we're seeing is creating a type of techno Tower of Babel, then we have to ask the question: okay, where is this? Where now do we step over certain lines? And I think sometimes it's even just at a personal level. We have to ask ourselves: okay, what is the technology doing to me? What is it doing already to myself? And I see this especially with social media. I see this with our instant wired world. I'll give you an example. The first time I went to the Transhumanist conference with the Mormon community back in 2010, I took some time to go to the University of Utah's library. I love libraries. I've got a large library myself. I love books. And I was walking through the stacks, and it was pretty well empty. Now, that day I had heard all kinds of conversations about wirelessly connecting ourselves and brain-computer interfacing and all kinds of amazing technologies to enhance ourselves, and we would kind of lose ourselves into this virtual world. And I was like, whatever, you're rolling that around in your head. Then I walked into the commons room in the university. And I remember back in the 80s, going into a university commons rooms, there'd be laughter, there's joking, there's the sound of pages flipping, there's things going on. I walk into the commons room, and there must have been maybe 200 students, and it was dead quiet. Dead quiet. As everybody was doing this, or basking in the glow of their laptops, or earbuds, or all the above, and it was like, I'm in the hive. I'm in the stinking hive. You know, I want to throw some food, start a food fight, yell, do whatever. Come on, wake up. You don't even know who's sitting beside you.
It's the collective consciousness. Well, maybe if you just plugged in and just started to be part of it, maybe, you know, you'd see the benefits. I mean, Carl, you know.
Ironically, it's kind of interesting because I'm on I use virtual worlds in terms of doing social research, and I've talked to transhumanists who aren't even on virtual worlds yet, and it's like, you know, I mean, yeah, this is we're plugging ourselves in. So sometimes I, for myself, have to ask, all right, where, Carl, do you end up drawing the line and realizing that this is now shaping your worldview? You're becoming dependent on that.
It's a really big question for the reasons you laid out, and then more. I mean, we have all this discussion in our country right now about the NSA, and, you know, are they using their technology to spy on our phone calls and keep track of where we go? Currently in Illinois, because they're losing so much revenue due to making automobiles more energy efficient, are talking about putting devices on your car to track your mileage, which also then would give them the ability to find out where you're at all times. As you're talking about this transhumanism, you're talking about something called neural dust.
Yes.
And so if you have this neural dust and they are now connected into a bigger internet, let's say, are we really more worried about NSA spying on our thoughts even?
I'm glad you brought that up. I was at a transhumanist conference in a virtual world where we were discussing what it means if we are able to link up our minds with wireless technology or through some type of chip implant. What would that mean? What would that look like in terms of those who refuse to go along? And one of the transhumanists at this event was kind of giddy about it. You know, well, maybe if you don't go along, you won't be able to buy or sell. You won't be able to get yourself hooked in or connected in. To be a true global citizen, you need to be wired in. I thought, interesting.
Yeah.
No,
So
thank you.
You were in this virtual reality. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I was. I use 2 or 3 fairly regularly in terms of doing social research, going to conferences, connecting with people. When the Burning Man event takes place in the real world in Nevada, there's also a burn that gets together in a virtual world. I go and interact with the people who are part of that burn community. And what's fascinating is even last year I was at a small transformational festival, which is a cultural festival movement particularly gravitated to by the millennial generation. And I was doing a social survey, and this was on the ground, this is in real life, and asking the question of past religious positions and present religions. And on at least 2 occasions, having young people at this concert transformational event saying, oh, I was a Christian, now I'm a transhumanist. I was an atheist, now I'm a transhumanist. So the millennial generation, they get this. They're seeing this. They're experiencing it. They've been preached about this for a long time. And so for them, they see this as something that's a logical extension.
Okay. Which kind of brings me back to something Ron started with in Hebrews. And maybe that helps us to transition back into how does this impact the church and how do we respond to it in culture. It seems to me there's 2 motivations. One is just the fascination with technology. We like technology. The other is the fear of death, which which Ron brought up in Hebrews. So this is not a new fear of death, but another way to try to overcome death so that they don't have to fear it without going to God. Would that be a correct analysis? A way
Yes.
to, because of their fear of death, is driving them to try to find a way to gain immortality and not have to die, but not have to come to grips with their place before God.
Right, right. That I think is a fair analysis for those who are of the atheist persuasion, because at one point transhumanism really gravitated more to those who were atheists, secularists. They wouldn't necessarily see it from that perspective of God, but they would simply see it as our own physical salvation, our own immortality. We don't have to experience death. You know, one part of this whole conversation I think is important is what do we as Christians do about it? And you alluded to that earlier already. I think one of the things we need to do is consider that this is an opportunity. We need to consider this as an opportunity to be able to inject biblical truth into the conversation, because there is a spirituality to all of this. There is a spiritual flavoring that can't be ignored, and I think it's important that we're able to therefore bring the gospel message of salvation in, contrasting it to the concepts that the transhumanist community are putting forward. One of the things I did back in 2013 was I was asked to give a talk to the Mormon Transhumanist Association, and it was a Christian criticism of transhumanism, and the bottom line ended up going to Luke 23, and in Luke 23 we have Jesus at the cross, and we have the thief on either side, and I made the point to the Mormon group that look, we have the one thief who is denouncing God, he's blaspheming. The other thief says, "This is an innocent man. Do you not fear God?" And then the thief says to Jesus, "Remember me today in paradise." And what was interesting is what Jesus didn't say, and this is something I stressed to the MTA, to the Mormon Transhumanist Association. He didn't say, "Go find a technical solution to your death." He didn't say, "Go down, become a part of the priesthood, engage in the temple." He didn't say go do good works. He didn't say, well, you're really messed up, you lost out, you can't get off the cross, you're doomed. He didn't say any of that. None of that. Instead he said, remember to, he said, He'll remember. I gotta get this right now in my head. I've got 1,000 different thoughts going on.
This day you will be with me in paradise.
Right. Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Awesome. I needed an upgrade, I guess. Today, yes, you'll be with me in paradise. I mean,
your link to the collective was a little,
it was gone, unplugged. But I mean, okay, it is either Jesus, or it's whatever else you're going to try to find to fill Jesus and to fill his shoes, and you can't. We can't. And that's been the 2,000-year struggle. Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? Well, we have now the concept of a techno-Jesus. Good luck. I don't want it to be a Windows-based or a Mac-based techno-Jesus.
You know, it's funny. I've seen there are schools of apologists out there who would say that maybe we're being a little too mean to these people when we challenge or critique their views. I noticed several times you've mentioned that and I'm sure you presented in a dignified, loving manner. You know, when you present the critique, you're doing it in an ironic spirit, peaceful spirit. But there's some people who aren't even satisfied with that. When you mention Burning Man, I think of one particular so-called apologist who shall be nameless, except to his mom and his kids. You know, his approach to the Burning Man thing was to ask, you know, what is this saying about us? And you know, and my answer to that question is, it's about, I know what it's saying about me. It's like, I'm glad those people are over in the desert and I'm over here because I want to keep my distance from them, you know. And I know that's not a very Christ-like spirit to have, but the fact is that today, Burning Man, I mean, when he was talking about it, very few people ever heard of it. In fact, I only heard about it through him. Now you see, you know, it's an annual event in the desert where they just do all kinds of interesting things that are definitely not part of the kind of, which we used to call, when I was a kid, countercultural, or counter something, and they. You know, their biggest claim to fame is that they leave the desert exactly the way they found it. You know, they build a virtual city in this location, and then and so that's very attractive to the green people. You know, the environmentalists. The whole thing has a kind of a religious aura to it. There's some kind of spiritual, religious, kind of pagan, really. It's going. You know, they erect this huge statue out of wood, right, of a man every year, and they burn it at the end.
That's right.
The climax of it is to burn the Burning Man, and then I don't know how they get rid of all the ashes. I mean, supposedly they leave the desert. I'll take their word for it. They leave the desert exactly the way they found it. Now, you know how they do that. I wonder if technology is involved in that. But you know. Today, those people are still like way out on the fringes. Do you see them? I mean, I see the media giving them a little more coverage every year, a little more coverage, until I'm waiting for the action figures to come out. You know, I'm waiting for it to go. You know, waiting for Burning Man lunch boxes for kids. I mean, come on, someday it's got to go mainstream, right? What do you think is going to happen with this?
Well, I actually will have to disagree with you. It is mainstream.
It's already mainstream.
It's more mainstream than you realize.
Oh,
well,
okay.
I'll tell you why. This is a place.
Can I
now
go to Legoland and get a Burning Man? My son is really into Legos. I think you might like this. Okay, go ahead.
Well, where this has gone mainstream is within a movement called transformational culture or transformational festivals. Burning Man has spawned not just dozens, but potentially hundreds of similar events. They are in every state. Every state now has a Burning Man community.
Well, you know,
every
we have
province
them
has a
too.
Burning Man community.
We have them in Florida. We call them barbecues.
Florida, I know you have a number of major events. What is fascinating with this movement, though, is the millennial generation considers this their sacred space. And so at the end of the Burning Man festival, you burn the man, but then the day after you burn the temple, and they erect an incredible temple that they all sit around and burn at the end of the event. This is just one of dozens and dozens and dozens of events, hundreds of events. Literally, I've tracked about 280 in Canada and the US alone. Now, not all of them are connected to Burning Man, but they're all connected in the sense of having a spiritual flavor, the sense of community, connection, and oneness. It's really a revisitation of the pagan ideal.
And so you can feel a sense of unity, connection, oneness with somebody sitting next to you, and all they're wearing literally is tattoos. I mean, I don't know if I want too much unity, connection, or oneness. So it's like, yeah, they're sort of going mainstream, but the way it's done in Burning Man, what state is that held in? Is it like Nevada?
Yeah.
Okay, anything can go there, right? There's still, the concept is becoming more mainstream, but the lengths to which they take it there, would you say? I can't see, this happening. I can't see Burning Man happening in my hometown.
It probably won't. It probably won't, but I guarantee that you'll have people within your area, your community, that'll have the same worldview.
Oh, okay.
All right. You know what? We're getting near the end, and I just noticed we're kind of capturing some cultural questions as sort of springboard off of transhumanism.
Mm-hmm.
In this way, there's this desire to find something bigger than myself,
right?
To belong to be part of a group that will accept me as I am. Whatever that is like, sitting around in nothing but tattoos, for example, that it's not going to go really well in Ron's Presbyterian Church. Most likely.
Won't go well in ours either.
So we're not going to answer this tonight, likely, and we're going to have to come back and revisit it, maybe even next week. I don't know. We can talk about that. But how do we as a church, as believers in a culture that basically has reverted back to first century Rome in thinking and behavior, how do we challenge, interact with, present the gospel? How does the church in its normal meeting times have a way to engage the body of Christ so that they feel like they belong? That there's something more than just coming in and filling in my Sunday time.
Oh, well, first of all, Don, I think it's important for us as Christians to realize that our identity is not within our community. Our identity is within Jesus Christ.
Ah, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, and once we grasp that, having community then becomes a secondary thing that's a blessing. It is a blessing, but it is not the goal. It's not our end product. Our community, though, should be a place, our Christian community, our churches, should be a place of equipping so that we have a biblical, theological foundation, so that we can answer when the world challenges it, whether it's through the new pagan revival, whether it's through transhumanism, whatever it may be. I suggest we need to look at the approach of Paul in Acts 17. And Acts 17, you understand that's the Mars Hill event. And Paul goes there engaging the Gentiles and the Jews. He's going there to preach the gospel, but he understands their worldview, and he understands their spiritual worldview well enough that he can leverage their culture. He can quote their poets. He can quote their philosophers, and he brings all this around in a way that honorably brings forward the character of God, the nature of man, and Jesus Christ's salvation. Now, some believed, others mocked. Some said we'll hear more. That's the same response we're going to get. It always boils down to something as basic and simple as that. But it really is about, now we have the opportunity, let's find that opportunity to leverage that worldview to open up a conversation back to Jesus Christ.
Okay. What is your Facebook page?
My Facebook page, take and do a search in Facebook for Forcing Change. You can also just type in my name, Carl Teichrib. Same with my Twitter page. It goes under Forcing Change. Our website is forcingchange.org, but it's been down for a little while as we are revamping and restructuring it. We're coming out with a book this summer, Lord willing, and then we'll be revitalizing the website as well.
Now, you don't call that forcing change because you're in the business of forcing change, right? Is that why you're...
That's right. No, we're not. We're not forcing the change, but we are looking to answer those intellectual, spiritual forces that wish to change our culture.
Okay. Ron, do you have any final commercials before we go out?
Well, yeah, we do need to hear from one more sponsor. Who asks the question, are you tired of trying to figure out the difference between the milk of the Word and the meat of the Word? Is your spiritual appetite being satisfied with Sunday morning sermons? Does your pastor take this whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your usual Sunday morning worship service. At the Bible Buffet, everything centers around your comfort. I mean, just look at these really nice eateries that they have everywhere that you can go. At the Bible Buffet, what you get there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and of course, truth claim-free. We have just the finest in warm food, hot food, cold food, whatever you like. This week's specials, by the way, they've added to their regular Sunday specials. They have Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, and now all new Gnostic nut salad and Pelagian pie. The Bible Buffet is, don't forget this, it is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism, the Bible Buffet.
Right. I think Carl's losing it with that one.
You know,
that was awesome, Ron. That was really good.
We're going to have him back. Carl's given me the most laps of anybody for sponsors. Not that we're making fun of our sponsors, by no means.
Oh, it's very serious. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Yes, it is very
something
serious.
that we discovered. I mean, when I met Carl, we both stayed at Bill McKeever's house, which was great fun in Mormon Research Ministries in Utah. And we went to the Parliament of the World's Religions, and we kept finding each other in the same workshops. Usually after the workshop was over. So, like I asked the Wiccan group, and didn't know Carl was in there, as they were talking about how that Isis is one of the oldest goddess stories. And so as I listened to the whole thing about Isis and Osiris, and I got to ask a question, and I raised my hand at the end, and they called on me. They probably shouldn't have. And I asked, I said, as I hear your story, do we understand that incest is not either really morally right or wrong, it's just morally neutral? And they looked puzzled, and I said, well, if Osiris and Isis were brother and sister, they married, they in turn had children, wouldn't it be that incest is morally neutral? And they spent a few minutes kind of talking about how we don't have all the information, there's other stuff that we might not have, and by the way, there is incest in the Bible, for those who want to think about that. And then they turned to call on someone else, and I raised my hand, and they said, did you have a follow-up question? I said, well, really, it's the same question. Is incest morally neutral? Neither right or wrong, but it's just personal preference. They still didn't know what to say, and the leader picked up the microphone finally, and she said, we wouldn't condone it. Carl thought it was a good question, and they couldn't answer it.
Right.
Well, you know, but you know, they're never going to let you ask another question. I'll tell you that.
Maybe not.
I don't blame you either.
But anyway, when we were talking, getting ready for this, I discovered that Carl likes history as much as you and I do. So we were talking about progressivism, laissez-faire capitalism, all that was going on in the 1930s, and the difference between communism and socialism, and so we might want to do something like that in the middle of this political season. And how does that impact our view as believers, if at all?
Yeah, I wonder if any of the candidates are going to go and visit the Burning Man Festival. Is there going to be one before the election? Or is that in the wintertime? I don't know.
It happens at the end of
and
August.
will their theme be "Feel the Burn"?
Yeah.
They go into the desert at the end of August? Oh, seriously? Okay.
Seriously, yeah.
I would die. Yeah, okay.
All right. Well, this has been fun, and we will pick this up again next week. We don't know what we're going to do yet, but whatever it is, we'll have fun with it. So join us next week. And with that, you all have a good night.